Today, I'm ranking all 14 East games from worst to very best. And when a series is almost universally amazing, ranking the games is incredibly difficult. But I personally think my top 3 are going to shock you. I love the Ys series. I've been playing it for over 10 years, and at this point, I've played every game in the series. Now, if you've never played the Ys series, Ys is an amazing action RPG with the first game dating all the way back to 1989 on the PC Engine, and it follows the adventures of Adol Christin, a red-headed adventurer who somehow gets involved with ancient gods and demons everywhere he goes, all while causing shipwrecks like it's a natural-born ability. The games are fast-paced, exciting, with great music and amazing stories. Today, we're diving into something I've wanted to do for a very long time. We're ranking all 14 Ys games from worst to very best, including a couple of weird entries that don't neatly fit into the mainline numbering but absolutely deserve to be talked about. Now, if you've been around the Ys series for even 5 minutes, you already know how chaotic it can be. There's versions everywhere. There's ports, there's remakes that completely replace the original, Japan-only releases, 3 different Ys 4s. It's beautiful, but it's a mess. So, to keep things clean for today's video, and to maintain my own sanity, I'm ranking only the most recent or definitive versions of each game. The versions that Falcom themselves consider the latest expression of each title. However, if this video does well, and if you express interest, I will absolutely go full chaos and rank every single version of every single Ys game ever made. PC 88, PC 98, TurboGrafx CD, PS2 ports, obscure Japan-only editions, everything. Yeah, it would be completely unhinged and honestly kinda perfect for this channel. However, before we do jump into everything, leave a like if you enjoyed these kind of ranking videos, subscribe if you want weekly JRPG content, and tell me in the comments what is your favorite Ys game. Everybody's ranking is different, and that's what makes this series so fun to talk about. With that being said, let's get into it. So we're going to start in last place with Ys Strategy. From the moment you hear the title, I'm sure you're thinking exactly what I'm thinking. Falcom, why? Ys Strategy is exactly what it sounds like, a real-time strategy spin-off where you command units in a top-down battlefield. It feels like Falcom asked, what's one genre that perfectly captures the speed and adrenaline of Ys? And someone in the back yelled, strategy game, as a joke. Unfortunately, Kondo seemed to take it seriously. To be fair, the concept is kind of interesting. Seeing the Ys universe through a new lens had potential, and there is a certain charm to the character art and presentation. Even though, and this is important, Ys Strategy was not developed by Falcom. It was outsourced to a studio called Future Creates, which explains a lot. Like the fact that Adol has for some reason been renamed Abel. Because why not, I guess. But the real problem with it is the gameplay. It's clunky, it's stiff, it's slow, and absolutely not fun by anyone's standards. It doesn't resemble anything that Ys fans love. The speed, the flow, the precision, they're all gone. What we're left with feels more like a low-budget mobile prototype than an actual Falcom adjacent release. And it was locked to the DS with a very tiny print run, and I think it was Europe only, making it incredibly difficult to access legitimately today. I'll be nice and say this. Ys Strategy is an interesting oddity. It's the kind of game you bring up during a trivia night to stump people. But as an actual entry in the franchise, yeah, this one stays at the bottom. At number 13 is the crossover literally no one asked for, but honestly, you knew you wanted it. Ys vs Trails in the Sky Alternative Saga. Imagine taking Ys 7's combat system, turning it into a fast-paced multiplayer arena fighter, tossing in Estelle, Joshua, Adol, Dogi, and a bunch of Falcom favorites and saying, yeah, this is canon now, probably. Now the music, it slaps. The interactions are just what you'd expect. Seeing these two universes intermingle was something that just makes me smile. I love Trails in the Sky. Ys is one of my favorite series of all time, so seeing the characters meet each other was just beautiful. Also, I kinda love that Adol has a pet Picard. It even recently got a remaster. It made it prettier and smoother than ever. Much better than the PSP release. And it's complete with English voice acting that honestly kinda sounds good. but for all of its charm it has, it's still very much a side dish. The story is paper thin, and feels like Falcom just duct taped both worlds together just to make it work. The gameplay loop is simplistic compared to mainline Ys, and the whole thing is very short. Like, you can beat it in one evening. It's a nice novelty for fans of both series, but it's not something that holds up as a full experience. Still, as far as crossover treats go, it absolutely hits the spot. Now for number 12, we're gonna go to that strange, odd corner of Falcom history. Ys Online, the Ark of Napishtim. Now this is not the mainline Ark of Napishtim. This is an online MMO that was developed for mobile. This was Falcom's attempt to bring Ys 6 into the MMO light space, with colorful character designs, multiple playable classes, and a structure that lets you explore the Canaan Islands in a different light. But I'm not the kind of person to not give credit where it's due. The artwork of Ys Online is genuinely gorgeous. The presentation has that cozy mid-2000s Falcom vibe, and the game world adapts surprisingly well to online play. It even loosely follows the storyline of Ys 6, which we'll get into much later on this list, so it wasn't just a meaningless spin-off. But then we hit the problems. Mainly, this is a mobile-only gacha game, and not the modern type. We're talking old school mobile. So yes, is there an MMO grind? Absolutely. Does it have that gacha style progression? Yep. Combat that lacks the punch of single player ease? Definitely. You just spam abilities on cooldown. And enemies, even bosses, fall way too fast. Now the one part that really surprised me is Ys Online Ark of Napishtim is surprisingly still up. Now you might have difficulties logging in, but you can still play through the entire game. Is it a neat experiment? Sure. But is it something essential to the series? Definitely not. Okay, now with number 11, let's get back into the main series. With Ys 5, Kefin, the Kingdom of Sand is, well, it's special. It's Falcom during an experimental phase, trying ideas that would eventually evolve into something far better. This was actually the first game where they didn't use the bump system, which again we'll talk about in a little bit. So let's start with the good. The Desert Kingdom setting is unique and atmospheric. It has that warm, nostalgic 90s adventure tone, and it still holds up beautifully. The soundtrack, sure, it's kind of weak when it comes to Falcom, but it's not bad by any means. And the game really tries to innovate magic-focused combat, a more ambitious world, more emphasis on exploration and puzzle solving, but the execution, that's where it kind of falls apart. Combat is very slow, and the hitboxes are very odd. Magic is cool in theory, but borderline useless in practice. And the difficulty is laughably low, to the point where most bosses feel like regular enemies with a slightly bigger health bar. Now later on the PS2, they did release an expert version of the game, but even then, it's still way too easy. And the pacing of the game is very uneven, with backtracking that feels more like padding rather than progression. It's also one of the few Ys games that feels a little unfinished, as if the blueprint was there, but the final polish wasn't put into action. This is the only classic Ys game that has yet to see any remasters or remakes, and if any Ys game needs a remake, this is the one. It has the potential, but it was squandered aggressively. Now with that being said, Kondo has said that he wants to remake Ys 5 before he retires. So hopefully within the next year or two, maybe even before Ys 11, we actually get a remake of this game. Now with all that being said, Ys 5 is important. You can see the DNA of later masterpieces in the Ys series forming here. It's kind of like that awkward teenager stage of the franchise. Sure, it's annoying. Sure, it's not the greatest, but it's part of the family all the same. Alright, now it's time to break into the top 10. And what's better to break into the top 10 than with Ys 1, Ancient Ys Vanished? And before we begin, I want to preface this with saying that none of the Ys games in the top 10 are bad by any means necessary. Impure diamonds are still diamonds all the same. Ys 1 starts off with Adol shipwrecking in Asteria. an ongoing theme in the Ys series, and it also introduced the world to the Ys franchise with its bump combat, a system that sounds like a joke until you try it, and then suddenly you're diagonally shoulder-checking demons until they explode into blood and guts. A little aggressive, but I'm here for it. The soundtrack of Ys 1 is legendary. Felghana, First Steps Towards Wars. The music alone cemented Ys as something special back in the late 80s, and that's honestly what drew me towards this series and made me such a huge fan of it. Now, Ys 1 is short, like 5 hours, maybe 10 hours, but it's very memorable. It's a compact adventure that still has charm today, but we have to acknowledge the flaws. The bump system is divisive. Not everybody likes it, and that's fair. It can be a little bit frustrating at times. And the story, it's extremely simple by modern standards, but hey, this is a game from 1989. You can't expect it to be amazing. And the level cap is strangely low. You cap out at level 10, and chances are you're going to hit that within the first half hour to an hour. It makes the late game balance a bit awkward. And the final boss, Dark Fact, is an absolute menace who has traumatized players for decades. Seriously, he is far harder than he has any right to be, to the point where it feels almost like RNG, like complete randomness if you actually win or not. Still, it's impossible not to respect Ys 1. It built the foundation for everything that came after. Speaking of which, after Ys 1 is Ys 2. Ys 2 is what happens when Falcom takes a cool idea and says, okay, now let's actually refine this. Ys 2 expands everything. It has a bigger world. It has an in-depth story. It has more characters. It has even more lore. The addition of magic transforms the bump combat into something far more dynamic. Suddenly, you can attack enemies at range and interact with puzzles and fight bosses in new ways. The world building also jumps to incredibly high levels compared to Ys 1. You get to figure out every mystery that Darm Tower holds. The goddesses are suddenly much more important, and the lore of ancient Ys finally comes together in a meaningful way. There's still a bit of early grinding if you're not used to the flow of the game, and it's incredibly easy to get lost in the dungeons because everything looks identical. But if you're willing to put in that dedication, maybe use a map or two that you found online, you'll realize Ys 2 is a massive improvement and the true payoff to the original adventure. If you have not played the original duology, I suggest you give it a shot. The Chronicles version on the PC and PSP is your best option. The bump system is a bit clunky at first, but once you get used to it, you'll realize just how fun it is. Coming in at number 8 is Memories of Celceta, Falcom's official take on the notoriously messy Ys 4 timeline. Memories of Celceta is above all else playable. Combat is fast. The movement is smooth. Flash Guard and Flash Move feel amazing once you get them down. And exploring the giant forest feels like a balanced mix between Metroidvania structure and classic Ys freedom. The character banter is fun. The soundtrack is modern Falcom excellence, and the pacing rarely drags. But I can't help but think that this game is just a poor remake of Ys 4 Dawn of Ys for the TurboGrafx CD. Despite using the bump system and being decades older, it just feels substantially better in art, in voice acting, and in overall feel. Celceta just never matches that. The story is easily the weakest of the party system era. The map filling gimmick starts fun and ends up repetitive. Especially frustrating if you're trying to get that PlayStation trophy by getting 100% completion on every map. I'll never forget being stuck at 99.8% and needing to go through every single map and every single screen in the game, hugging the edges, trying to find that 0.2%. And the dungeons feel very generic, and as a result, I honestly don't remember much, if anything, about the Memories of Celceta. It's kind of ironic that Memories of Celceta is one of the most unmemorable games in the series. And compared to the sheer heights of Ys 8 and Ys 9, it definitely feels like it's just a stepping stone to something better. This is a pleasant Ys game to play, even if it's not one of the best.
Let me at it!
Ys 7 is where Falcom took a bold leap and introduced the party system, a move that split the fanbase clean in half. And I'll be 100% honest, the party-based Ys system is by far my least favorite engine in the series. It doesn't feel as refined and gives too many limitations in comparison to the bump system or the Napishtim engine. But with that being said, let's start with the positives. Those boss fights are spectacular. They're huge, cinematic, ambitious encounters that push the PSP to its limits. Not to mention they were difficult. I died so many times fighting the first boss. Skill issue? Probably, but it doesn't mean I didn't have fun. The soundtrack has that classic high-energy Falcom flavor. This is something that drew me towards Ys in the first place. The soundtracks are downright fabulous. The story is surprisingly strong, and the ending will hit you right in the feels. It's honestly incredibly sad, but like a good sad. A sad that makes the entire journey of E7 worth playing. But yeah, the party system in this early form was kind of rough. It was before they ironed out all the kinks in it. Hit detection can feel almost mushy, making you wonder if you hit the enemy or not. Those animations feel dated and very stiff. And overall, it's a bit more linear than later entries. Still, E7 is one of the most important games in the franchise, which leads me to ask, why has there not been a console remaster or port? Sure, it got a port to PC, and that's great, but I would love to have a port to consoles. E7 laid the groundwork for Memories of Salsetta, Ys 8, Ys 9, and 10, and you can feel what E7 started in every modern Ys title. Alright, so before we jump into the really good stuff, the top 6, I want to gently remind you to subscribe. Or aggressively remind you to subscribe, depending how chaotic the edit looks. Because statistically speaking, half of you watching this video are probably like Adol, wandering into my channel with no memory of how you got here. So if you're enjoying this ranking, even just a little bit, hit that subscribe button, so you don't forget me like Adol forgets every supporting character he meets. Alright, the top 6 starts now. Ys 9 is a bold, atmospheric, stylish entry that pushes the series in a new direction. The movement abilities are incredible. Gliding, grappling, wall running, finally giving Adol mobility that matches his legend. Traversing Balduke feels like exploring a giant vertical labyrinth full of secrets. The story is easily the deepest and most lore-heavy in the franchise. Sometimes it's too deep. There are moments where you can feel Trail's energy leaking into Ys. Long cutscenes, big lore dumps, and while it's great writing, it's definitely a shift from the usual gameplay first philosophy. The cast is fantastic, with memorable personalities and strong emotional moments. The boss fights, they hit incredibly hard, and longtime fans will catch tons of references sprinkled through those bosses, since some of them return from old games in full 3D HD glory, and the narrative is also filled with references to previous games. However, with this all being said, there are flaws to Ys 9. First and foremost, if you're playing it on the Switch, it performs poorly, like borderline unplayably poor. I'm not sure if the Switch 2 improves the performance, but the Switch version of Ys 9 is not something I'd wish on anyone. Some dungeons kind of feel copy-paste. Sometimes I felt as if I was going through the exact same catacomb over and over. And based on the whole setting, the exploration feels very minimal. You're stuck in Balduke for 80% of the game, and it kind of kills that whole vibe that Ys is known for. Every Ys game feels like a grand adventure where you can explore to your heart's content. Ys 9 makes you feel almost like a caged rat, and I didn't care for that. And as I mentioned before, the heavy story sections slow down the pacing for those of us who want that non-stop action. Still, Ys 9 is stylish, it's ambitious, and it's bursting with personality. It's not the worst game in the series, but it does kind of lack some aspects that would put it into the top 3. Ys 10 Nordics is Falcom taking another creative risk and delivering something fresh and exciting. Keep in mind, this is the standard Ys 10 I'm talking about and not the proud re-release. I still can't believe they announced that game a week after the localization. Terrible. Betrayal. Anyways, back on track. The new combat system blends classic single-character Ys gameplay with the modern party system shown through solo mode and duo mode. When it works, it feels incredible. It's fast, it's fluid, it's responsive. My favorite addition is the removal of attack types from the party system, so you don't feel like you're punished for using Adol. I mean, there's only 2 characters, Adol and Karsha, but you know what I mean. Then there's the sailing, a slower start, like painfully slow at the beginning. But once your ship gets upgraded, exploration becomes one of the game's best features. And miraculously, Adol doesn't wreck the ship. Yeah, I'm as shocked as you are. Who's a genius that thought giving Adol his own ship was a good idea? But the world feels adventurous in a way Ys hasn't captured since Ys 8. I love sailing between islands and fighting hidden treasure and enemies on various islands. It sort of reminded me when I was a kid in the 90s. I would just hop on my bike and just ride. Find somewhere I'd never been and just explore around to my heart's content. Ys 10 captures that feeling perfectly. But Ys 10 Nordics is beautifully visually, with polished animations and very strong art direction, even if Adol's art for this game is a little bit odd. The soundtrack is solid too. Not the best in the series, but it's way up there, and still unmistakably Falcom. The downsides of Ys 10 Nordics is the early game is so story heavy, to the point where it feels like Trails wandered into the wrong franchise. Seriously, the first 2 or 3 chapters are nothing but lore dumps and scenic setups, and I've never wanted to skip scenes so much in my life. Now the story and the lore isn't bad, but I got to the point where I was just like, I just want to fight things. And some enemies and assets, they repeat a bit too often. Most of the game, you're just fighting more powerful versions of the same enemies over and over, till maybe the last chapter or two, and it left a lot to be desired. And the new combat system won't click for everyone. Being parry-centric, it can prove to be difficult at times, especially if you aren't good with timing, as well as swapping between characters at the right time. It's a step up from the party system that we've grown to love, but I feel it could have been executed a little bit better. But overall, Ys 10 is a bold, heartfelt adventure and is full of innovation. It's a smart evolution of the franchise, even if I hope that the series steps back from the overabundance of dialogue. I have actually reviewed this game on the channel, so maybe check that out later if you're curious on my full thoughts of Ys 10 Nordics. Next, we're going to jump into Ys Origin. Ys Origin is the prequel to the entire franchise. It uses the platforming style from Ys 6 and takes place roughly 700 years before the events of Ys 1, which means, yep, no Adol. No fiery, red-headed adventurer causing shipwrecks like it's his day job or releasing ancient gods of destruction. But with that being said, let's get more into Ys Origin. Ys Origin is pure distilled Ys, the franchise at its most focused and refined. There's no overworld that you get to explore. There's no pointless filler. All you have is tight dungeon crawling action through Darm Tower, one of the most iconic locations in the Ys franchise, which if you play the series for its feeling of exploration, might actually be a downside. Ys Origin features 3 playable characters, each with their own distinct combat styles. Each route adds new story content, giving Origin tons of replay value. And the soundtrack is incredible. The boss fights are some of the best Falcom has ever made. The only real downside is the lack of visual variety. Darm Tower is Darm Tower for the entire runtime, but the game is so tight and polished that it hardly matters. That, and if you play Origin first, it spoils Ys 1 and 2. But on the flip side, if you play Ys 1 and 2 first, it spoils Ys Origin. Nothing super significant, but it is something to keep in mind. Origin is one of the strongest action RPGs of its era, and thankfully it's usually pretty cheap, so you have no reason not to give it a shot. Alright, now we're going to enter the top 3. And at number 3 sits the game that revitalized the franchise, Ys 6. This is easily amongst my favorite games in the franchise, and introduced my favorite engine when it comes to the Ys series. The combat of Ys 6, the Arc from Nepishtim, I'm never going to get used to saying that word, is fluid. It's fast. It's endlessly satisfying. To this day, many fans call it the best combat system in the series, myself included. There's just something about a button-mashy action-adventure RPG that just hits that dopamine level in ways the party system doesn't. It's also fun to see monsters explode in a mess of blood, bones, and guts. And the soundtrack of Ys 6 in true Falcom style is phenomenal, with tracks like Mighty Obstacle and Quatera Woods enhancing the entire mood of the game. I'm not exaggerating when I say that Ys soundtracks are really top tier. The story is simple but rich with charm. A classic Adol adventure full of mystery, ancient ruins, ancient gods, new friends, and memorable locations that all begins because Adol gets shipwrecked on the Canaan Islands. Classic Adol, causing sailors agony since 1989. That being said, the island setting feels cohesive and adventurous. I also really enjoyed how the weapon progression system adds depth. You have 3 different swords, each dedicated to a certain element, which grants different movement abilities. It encourages you to use the weapons not only for attacking enemies, but also to traverse the land and solve simple puzzles. The downsides, though, I'll be honest, there aren't very many. It's minor, but platforming can be frustrating when you constantly miss a jump that you swore you should have made, and backtracking is plenty without the PC version's fast travel. Though that being said, using the fast travel can kind of ruin the pacing of the game, because the game is balanced in a way that fighting the enemies as you backtrack will keep you at an appropriate level. Nothing a bit of a grind won't fix though, but Ys 6 as a whole is an absolute masterpiece. It absolutely deserves to be in the top 3 Ys games, but number 2 might upset you because most people might think it deserves the number 1 spot. Yep, it's Ys 8. This is the one that stunned everyone and kind of brought Ys into the mainstream and turned the series into one of the most well-known action RPG series out there. Well, at least in the West. Ys 8 isn't just great for an Ys title. It's one of the best action JRPGs of the entire decade, possibly of all time. The story is beautifully paced and surprisingly layered, and again, begins with Adol shipwrecking on an island. Goodness man, get some help. What did seafaring travel ever do to you? Well, with that being said, the relationship between Adol and Dana elevates the narrative of this game to heights Falcom had never reached before. The exploration presented in Ys 8 is phenomenal. You have so many different types of areas, from jungles to beaches to mountaintops. Every single area feels like a joy to explore. The deserted island setting creates a perfect loop of discovery, survival, and anxiety, and that payoff once you find out more of the mysteries of the island is beautiful. The combat of Ys 8 peaks the party system. It's fast, it's stylish, and incredibly satisfying. But like every other party Ys game, it does have those weapon types. It's never ideal to use both Adol and Dana in battle, because then you'll have 2 slash characters, and you'll have to give up either a blunt or pierce character, leaving you at a disadvantage if you run into an enemy weak to those types of attacks. Sure, it does help with item grinding, but this is just a personal gripe. It's a minor issue, but it's an issue nonetheless. Flash Guard and Flash Move feel even better than they did in Ys 7. They're super satisfying to pull off when everything slows down because you dodged or guarded at just the right time. And the music, it's among some of my favorite in the franchise. Eclusian Dance and Sunshine Coastline are some of my favorites. And let's not forget the hauntingly beautiful title screen music, Lacrimosa of Dana. Now, the weaknesses, Lacrimosa of Dana is long for an Ys game. Traditionally, Ys games have been short, sitting around 10 to 15 hours tops, but Ys 8 is 40 to 50 hours long and can be even longer if you do everything. This can be a positive to some. Maybe you want to spend longer in the Ys universe, but to others, it might feel it betrays what Ys has always been known for. And those base raids become repetitive chores, and I don't really enjoy them. Just endless waves of enemies that really add nothing to the overall experience of Ys 8. I could have done without them. But overall, Ys 8 is easily one of the best action RPGs of its generation, and a perfect introduction to the franchise. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you've probably played it before, but if you haven't, go do it now. Actually, hold off on that. Let's hear about the best Ys game to ever exist. Finally, at number 1, we have the ultimate expression of Ys greatness, Ys the Oath and Felghana, the remake of Ys 3. This game is the perfect action RPG. Oath and Felghana is fast, the exploration is plentiful, and it can be challenging. The pacing is outmatched, and it's endlessly replayable. Do you like to speedrun? It's perfect for that too. For the record, I finished the game in 47 minutes. You think you can do better? I'd like to see you try. Every moment of Oath and Felghana is tuned to perfection. The boss lineup is legendary. Every encounter tests your reflexes, pattern recognition, and mastery of the combat system. Are the bosses tough? Absolutely. But victory of these bosses is reliant on you knowing exactly how to use everything available to you to avoid damage. It's because of that when you do win, it feels earned. And that's a feeling you don't get by becoming overpowered. Now, the soundtrack of Oath and Felghana is absolutely iconic. It is probably my most listened to soundtrack in the entire series. Valentine Castle is up there as one of the greatest Falcom tracks ever composed, and the super high energy gets me pumped every time I play the game. Sure, Felghana is a short adventure, but in a good way. There's absolutely no fluff. Nothing feels like a filler or a waste of time. All you have is that pure action RPG bliss. The difficulty spikes are real, but they're part of what makes this game so great. Sure, the game pushes you, but it never wastes your time. Felghana isn't just the best Ys game, it's one of the greatest action RPGs ever made. It's up there with Ys 8. And that wraps up my full ranking of all 14 Ys games, from the quirky experiments to the absolute legend. Now it's your turn. Tell me in the comments, what's your personal favorite Ys game? How would you rank the series? And would you like me to go completely unhinged and rank every single version of every single Ys game ever made? If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for next week's JRPG deep dive. And lastly, if you've never played the Ys series before, and you're interested in jumping in, I actually did a video saying a good point where you can jump into the series based on your personal likes or dislikes, so maybe check that out now. This has been Shinky, thank you so much for watching, and until next week's video, have a wonderful day.